There are 3 grid tutorials: Basics, Data Manipulation, and Advanced. This is the second tutorial. Earlier we covered Basics. So as a review, Basics covered that a grid has a store. A grid displays one row for every record in the store. Grids have a columns array that specifies each column, and each column has 2 key properties: text and data index. Now I'm going to talk about data manipulation. And what I mean by that is, we have a grid, we're looking at the data, so I might need to sort, filter, group the data, or edit the data. Now editing is done with this concept called a plugin. So while I'm talking about editing, I'll also mention some of the other grid plugins. So let's start with sorting. So one important concept is sorting, filtering, and grouping are operations that you do on the store. The grid reflects the store. So if I had a store and I had no grid at all, I could still sort, filter, and group the data. Now grids have features that will change the sorting, filtering, or grouping automatically from the grid, but all it's doing is it's running those corresponding methods on the store. The store updates itself, and then the grid reflects that. So again, by default, if I click on a column, I'm simply sorting on that column. When you click on a column of a grid, what happens under the covers is the grid column says, give me my store, run sort on the store, and pass in the result of running this function called getSortParam. Normally you're not even aware that that exists, but getSortParam by default returns the data index. In other words, it just sorts on the data index for your column, and it passes that to the store updates, and the grid reflects that change. However, you're free to override that getSortParam function. So if you wanted to, you could sort on any column. Furthermore, you can also provide your own sorter comparator routine. So down here, we're providing our own sorter. Now these are unusual that you would do either one of these things, but you can if you need to. So the way this is coded, if I sort or click on the column for date, it will actually sort on airline. And if I try to sort airline, it will actually run this sorter routine. And this is just a silly, example, but what this is doing is this will sort on the reverse name of the destination. That's the to field. So this is just to illustrate, hey, you can sort on anything you need. So if I run this, so that's sorting on airline. If I click on this, it's sorting on the opposite of the destination. So the A, the destinations ending in A are first, and the destinations ending in these letters at the end of the alphabet, are last. This little demo, it says sort on destination. That's just a button with an event handler, and what it's doing is it's saying get the grid store and sort on some field. And this is just to illustrate that the grid will reflect the sorting on the store. So if I do that, the store updated and the grid reflects that. You can also sort through configuration. So when I ran this, it actually started out to be sorted on airline, and then we did another sort under program control. You can sort on multiple columns, so there's the configuration for that. In the grid then, all you do is say multi-column sort true, and you're done. So this is pretty easy. So this starts out with that default sort sequence, but if I click here and here now I'm sorting on multiple columns. You can add additional sorters, and this just says if you did that under program control, it will keep adding to the list of sorters unless you explicitly clear out that list. And this little example says, okay, we can sort on first name by clicking here. We can also sort on second letter or third letter. And if we were to read the code here, the code behind here, the second letter sort, there is a custom sorter that's being run that sorts on that. For the third letter sort, the logic here, all it's doing is this. We just defined a new field in the store, and that new column that we're not even showing in the grid, but the new column is the third letter, and we're sorting on that. So this is just an illustration that there's, lots of ways you could do sorting. By default is what most people need, so that's the easiest thing to set up. But if you need to set up your own custom sorters, that's pretty easy too. All right, so now let's talk about filtering. Filtering, as you can read here, it's non-destructive. That means if I filter the data and I remove the filter, the original data is there. It's cumulative, just like sorting, so if I add new filters, they'll be added on to the list of existing filters, and I can clear them all out. So I can do it under program control. So here's a regular grid. In this grid, there's a numeric field here that I can change the value. Notice it's filtering as I do that. I'm simply doing that under a program control. So there's a toolbar at the top. The toolbar has the spinner field. So as I spin it up or down, it's incrementing by 10. And when the change occurs, I'm listening to the change event, and it's running this routine. That routine simply says, get the store, clear out any existing filters, and then filter by this function. The function says, include the record if the record's hit points are greater than or equal to that value. So that's an example of doing it under program control. I can also do it through binding. This example is kind of obscure. You may not want to do this on your projects, but I'm just showing you can. So we're doing a binding. So there's that spinner. It's bound to a property whose name we made up. We're calling it value. In the store, we're saying, hey, I want my filters property to also be bound to that. So when that property changes, it will automatically filter on this filter function, and that's the same filter function. Or, now I should have shown you this first because it's the easiest and most common way to do it. You can simply say grid filters true. This is an example of a plugin. And by setting it like that, and then down below we simply say which columns need filtering. You can either say filter true, in which case it sort of deduces the UI based on the data type of the column, or you can specify the column type. But when you do it that way, what the user sees is this. So now I can filter on date, I can filter on, this value, etc. So that's ridiculously easy. Now let's talk about grouping. Grouping just means I have a store and I can group the store by any value. Now the store behaves like any other store, but there are then additional properties that say which records are in group, in the various groups. Normally you would just group on one field. Let's say you had a field that was like a categorical value, like a status code with low, medium, and high. You could just group on that. You can also provide your own function for grouping. For example, if you had a set of city names, you could provide a function that says group these cities based on the first letter, so all cities for the letter A, all cities for the letter B, etc. So in the grid, the setup here is trivial. This is like any other grid example we've seen with this one property. So if I run this, I want to group this, let's say, on airline. All I have to do is come here, say group by this field, and that's it. So you can see here we're seeing all of Air Berlin, Air Canada, Air Iceland, British Airways, etc. It grouped them automatically. I could have done it under program control, but it's just a feature built into the grid. Another interesting feature is called a chained store. I can have any number of grids or any part of my user interface tied to a given store. And in this example, they are. Both of these grids are looking at the same store. So what that means is if I sort one, it sorts the other. If I sort it here, it'll be sorted on the right. If I filter this one, the filter affects the one on the right, and vice versa. They're literally pointing at the same store. In the code, if we go down here and take a look, these are the two grids, and they're both pointing right now at this one store called Pokemon. But there's another store up above called Filtered Pokemon. Let's look at the definition for that. So here are my two stores. This store is chained to that store. Now, all chaining means is this second store is based on the original. It's not refetching the data. The data only got fetched once here with that URL. This is a reflection of the original. So when we run this one, if I filter the one on the left, it affects the one on the right, because the grid on the right, it's the chained store, and the chained store reflects the original. However, I can now filter this one independently. So this filter is not affecting the one on the left, and if I sort this, this is being sorted independently. Chain stores are literally pointing at the original records, and this slide illustrates that. So if I edit this record, and if you look on the left, see I updated this, and if I were to edit the one on the left, it's reflected on the right. Now we'll talk about some plugins. So this concept of a plugin is introduced at the top of the component hierarchy in Ext JS. And what that means is any component can have this capability of having a plugin. A plugin is just a class that gets a reference to the original component. So the plugin is able to do anything at once. It could listen to events, it could change the styling, it could do anything. So these grid plugins, here's a list. You can read here, cell editing, editable, etc. So let's take a look at some of these. So the editable plugin, here's a grid. If I tap here, off to the right it slides in this editor. This is well suited for mobile devices. And the config for this is trivial. You simply say, here's plugins. You name the plugin. This is all documented in the API docs. This plugin has other documentation that says, other properties, like the event that triggers it. And then down below, you specify which values are editable by stating that. You could also specify the name of an input field type. If you say editable true, though, it will deduce the field type depending on the data it finds. So again, I can tap here, and then I can edit it. There's a cell editor, looks like this. Notice there's two ways of setting up these plugins. In the previous example, it was an array that named the plugin. The alternate way of doing it is you have an object, and the properties of the object are the plugin type. Anyway, so we have cell editing turned on, and if I go to a cell, now I can edit that data. Row editor, very similar setup. Now I'm editing an entire row at once. There's a row expander plugin. So we've talked about all the editor plugins. Now I'll just mention a few others. Row expander plugin. This just lets you show other data for every record. Here I'm just showing an icon or an image, but I could have any other information I want in here. There's this row operations plugin. So basically, I can say, let the user select some rows and then take some operation against everything that they've selected. So that's sort of a built-in feature. What that looks like is this. So we're using the plugin. We're saying, what should we show to the user? So we're specifying the caption and the icon. We're saying what happens when the user selects that. And then up above here, those are those methods, and we're free to do anything we want. View options. Notice if I tap here and do a long tap, it shows those options off to the right. So again, this might be well suited for a mobile device. It's just another way of doing the same thing that you get from the column header menu. And then finally, there's a grid summary plugin. So if you look at the bottom here, we're showing summary information. So basically for that plugin, you name the plugin, and then you say what you want to show at the bottom of each row. What we're showing here is you can state what calculation to make, and you can also provide your own renderer for what you're displaying. So there's built-in properties for this, or you can provide your own function.